In the last episode of Paw Patrol, we had a look at the retro Oddworld handheld ports for the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. But that is only scratching the surface, as there are still the modern handheld ports to cover, all of which run the gamut from being good, terrible, or straight up broken. Perfect material for a show I like to call Paw Patrol, the show where we look at weird and interesting ports and spin-offs of our favourite games, and today we are taking a look at the rest of the Oddworld handheld ports. Oddworld Munch's Oddysee received 3 different modern handheld ports, and they all kinda suck in their own unique, confusing ways. None of them make any sense whatsoever, and the first to release was Munch's Oddysee HD for the PlayStation Vita in 2014, based on the HD remaster the game had received on the PS3 2 years prior. Developed by Just Add Water, the HD version is probably still the definitive way to play the game, with an improved control scheme, refined gameplay, new graphics and sound effects. While not improving on the original game in any big way, the new control scheme definitely helps iron out some of the smaller, annoying problems the original had. Like how GameSpeak basically ate up all of the face buttons, resulting in really awkward stuff like jump and interact being on the same button. If you do like Munch, then this is a very welcome remaster, at least if you're playing the PS3 version. I bought the Vita version when it came out, and have honestly been seething ever since. Because it's good. It's like so very nearly perfect. The controls are good, it looks really nice, and as much as I don't really enjoy the original Munch at times, these improvements are enough to make me want to play through it. But there are 2 really crap things about this port that ruin it for me. For starters, the music is all kinds of broken. Play the game for like 2 minutes, and the music will very suddenly and abruptly stop. And the only way to get it to come back is to save your game, go back to the main menu, reload your save, and even then, who's to say how long it will last until it cuts out again. That timer didn't even last like 10 seconds. On some levels though, the music doesn't cut out. Instead it layers itself on top of each other, so it's playing 2 songs at once, but then also plays it on a really short loop, and also all the instruments and notes are wrong. I don't know how to describe it, I don't know what went wrong, I don't know how this happens, but for half the game you're gonna be sat there in complete silence, and the other half is gonna sound like this. Especially because the music in Munch's Oddysee is some of the best in the series, it's a real shame that it's just so awfully broken here. And for the longest time, I thought I was going insane, that such a glaring problem could go unnoticed, because no review I've read of the game mentions it either. And I know it's not just me. Every single video I've seen of this game on YouTube, of people playing the game, shows the exact same thing happen.
Abe and Munch do have their own specific set of abilities, like Abe is fast on land and can jump high on land, meanwhile Munch is fast on water and can jump high in the water, so you have to...
How do you not notice? It's so obvious! That alone is honestly a deal breaker for me. But the second big problem is that the game will randomly crash your entire Vita. When I first bought the game, I saw it crash to what looked like the Vita's BIOS screen twice within an hour of playtime, and then decided that's probably not very healthy for it to do, and thought I'd wait for a patch. So here I am, 7 years on, and it's still just as broken. Annoyingly, I couldn't actually get any footage of the game crashing for this video. It was really random and sporadic as to when it would happen. The fact that something as obvious as the music being broken still hasn't been fixed basically tells me they never went back and fixed the crashing bug either. The game is still on sale in this broken state, and just to rub salt in the wound, even though the Vita ports of Stranger's Wrath and New and Tasty also include the PS3 version as part of your purchase, Munch does not. Which I can't help but feel was a conscious decision on their part to try and make me buy the game again. Well, it hasn't worked, but admittedly the only reason for that is because I didn't have a PS3 until very recently. The moment I have it again, I'll probably buy that straight away, to be honest. So it worked. Fuck you. Oh, fuck you. 7 years on. 7 years on, I'm still mad. The Vita version of Munch was quickly followed by a mobile port, this time developed by Square One, and despite the HD version being a thing that exists, the mobile game is instead its own port, based on the original Xbox version, with virtually no changes or improvements made whatsoever. So while you won't find any new graphics or gameplay changes here, you do at least get this pretty sick, terribly cut out PNG of Abe, awkwardly covering up where the Xbox controller's meant to be. And of course, instead of an Xbox controller, you also get, like, the worst touchscreen icons I think I've ever seen in a mobile game. Like, how do you even mess up cropping them that badly? I mean, I guess overall it isn't a terrible way to play Munch portably. The touchscreen controls are a bit jank, but the original game didn't really control that great either, so it's hardly ruining the experience here. It does make me laugh though that they realised how unplayable this game would be for most people on touchscreens, so in the options there's like this weird ass menu where you can just straight up say how fast you want Abe and Munch to move. Like, that's such a weird thing to be in control of. It feels like a debug menu I shouldn't be allowed into. I found putting Abe down to 1 and Munch up to 10 was the sweet spot for me. Like, it makes Munch and Abe basically move at the same speed, so Munch isn't totally awful to play as anymore. So that's good, at least, it has that going for it. Though it still of course begs the question as to why this isn't the HD version. Even if phones at the time would have struggled with the HD graphics, surely they could have at least ported across some of the improvements that version made. As it stands, it's just a sort of weird, awkward way to play Munch, though, I mean, it's like £2. So I probably should have had somewhere to go with that sentence before I started saying it, but I have nothing there. It's just a weird version of Munch. I mean, if you're desperate to play it on your phone, then go ahead, but is anyone desperate to play Munch on their phone? Around the time of the mobile port, a crisis was happening surrounding the version of Munch's Oddysee that was being sold on Steam. It was still the original PC release from 2001, which barely even runs on modern Windows. So what should they do? Maybe they could put Munch's Oddysee HD on Steam? Or they could take the mobile port that Square One had made, and then spend a year very slowly porting across the HD assets from the PS3 version, but none of the gameplay improvements, creating a bizarre Frankenstein's monster-esque port, which is neither HD or original. So yeah, they chose that one, based on the mobile version complete with crusty Abe, but now with the graphics and sound effects of the PS3 game. It's Well, it's not the choice I would have made in that situation, I'll say that much. I assume there was probably a reason why they would go this route rather than just use the HD version that already exists, but I have no idea what that reason could be. Anyway, you're probably wondering why I'm talking about the Steam version in a video about handheld ports, and that's because the most recent port Munch has received on the Nintendo Switch, despite mistakenly being called Munch's Oddysee HD by some people online, isn't actually Munch's Oddysee HD, but is literally just the Steam port. And even better than that, it's objectively worse than the Steam version, because that costs £4, and the Switch version costs £27 for the exact same game. Like, genuinely, why would anyone buy this? So, you can probably imagine my disappointment when I bought it, and saw that it was just the Steam port, and not the HD remaster that I still feel cheated out of getting 7 years ago. Remember to support me on Patreon. I promise to put your money to good use. It's fine. It runs at 60 FPS. It looks nice because of the HD assets, though they didn't bother porting across the lighting changes, so it still looks worse than the Vita version did. The music plays, so that's a bonus. But gameplay-wise, it's still basically the Xbox version with no improvements, which is so frustrating, because if it was the actual HD version, it would absolutely, no questions asked, be the definitive way to play the game. But as it stands, I can barely even bring myself to recommend it over the Vita version. Hell, not even the mobile version, at least that's only £2. It is terrible, awful, like shameful that this is being sold for £27. Absolutely terrible. Please don't buy it. Please don't buy any of them. Just buy the PS3 version, or if you can't do that, at least the Steam and GOG versions are vaguely comparable, just minus the gameplay changes, and also only £4, not £27. Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is a game that sticks out like a sore thumb in a series already so odd it's literally called Oddworld. Completely unlike anything else in the series, not even featuring Abe this time, you play as Stranger, a bounty hunter. With a mix of 3D platforming and first-person shooting, depending on who you ask, Stranger's Wrath is debatably the best game in the Oddworld series. And although I might be an Exodus girl, I still absolutely adore Stranger's Wrath. After all, there's nothing wrong with second place, especially second place to what I consider my favourite game of all time. What I love most about it is how it puts a unique spin on first-person shooting, all your ammunition being different live animals you have to hunt for yourself. Each of them are completely unique to one another, affording for different playstyles depending on whether you want to be stealthy and take out the enemies one at a time for a higher reward, or if you want to have fun and go loud style launching 50 machine gun bees at someone before they've even spotted you. The way these ammo types can be comboed together for different strategies, and the amount of freedom it gives you to use all these ammo types and how you see fit, is absolutely incredible. And it all comes together to form this satisfying gameplay loop as you take a bounty, head out to the location, fight through their goons, strategize on if you want to take them alive for extra money or if it would be easier to just kill them, and then that normally opens a shortcut that then seamlessly loops you back into town. Wow, it's just like Dark Souls. And on top of all that, it offers the most important thing an Oddworld can, an experience that you cannot find anywhere else, and if the one thing you took away from the first part of this series was that you should buy Abe's Exodus, The one thing you take away from this part is that you should absolutely buy Stranger's Wrath while you're at it too. It's like £7, and the PC version isn't a weird confusing mess like Munch's is. Anyway, same deal as Munch, Stranger's Wrath also got ported to the Vita, mobile, and Switch, so let's have a look and see if they managed to make any of them worth playing this time. Going into Stranger's Wrath HD for the Vita, I was honestly expecting the worst. Again developed by Just Add Water, and again based on a previously released HD remaster from the PS3, I was anticipating another Munch's Oddysee situation, especially because this port came out 2 years before that one did. But to my pleasant surprise, it's actually really good. You can probably tell by how a lot of the footage I'm showing here is from later in the game, and not just the opening, but I've actually been playing this game in my spare time, outside of getting footage for this video, just for the fun of it, which I was definitely not expecting. The game looks absolutely gorgeous on the Vita's screen. It controls really well, outside of some weird control mapping, like having to pinch the back touchpad to use the binoculars. Like, no thank you. Like, genuinely, it's just a good port of the game, and I think the fact I've chosen to play it over every other version of the game I own, which is literally all of them now because of this video, I think speaks volumes. It might not have the high frame rates or extra graphic settings of the PC release, but I don't have a proper desk right now, and I can play it snug in bed, so checkmate. The only thing about the game that even comes close to being a problem is the frame rate, which is what I call optimistically 60. Like, the main menu and some indoor scenes run at 60 FPS, but more realistically speaking, when you actually get into fights, you're gonna be hovering more around the 20s at some points. Now, this wasn't a big problem for me, you know, Miss Port Patrol over here who spends most of her time looking at games that run half this well, so I really had no problem adjusting to it. But if you are really desperate for a 60 FPS experience, you're better off sticking with the PS3 or PC versions. Of course, that is also just based on my playtime from the first half of the game. As of writing this, I haven't got to the end yet, which I know gets, like, absolutely crazy action-wise, so I'm gonna let future me throw up a message here about what they thought about the frame rate in those sections, and if it remains playable or not. Hopefully whatever I put on screen right now hasn't just totally ruined everything I just said. Outside of that though, any other problems are just small nitpicks. The font they used for all the menus now is really ugly. Only being able to use the touchscreen for menus is a bit awkward because they weren't really made for it. Sometimes Stranger gets stuck climbing up ropes. Not really sure what that's about. Honestly, like, those are the only things I can think of off the top of my head. It's just a good port, and a really nice way to play the game. Honestly, God knows what happened when they went on to port Munch. So, if you're looking to play Stranger's Wrath, and if you want it on the go, or, you know, COVID, probably more realistically, cozy in bed, then provided what the future me said didn't ruin everything I said about the game, then the Vita version is a damn good way to play it. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the mobile version. Releasing 2 years after the Vita port, and once again being handled by Square One, they basically pulled another Munch's Oddysee here, ignoring that the HD remaster exists, and just porting over the original game. Though, that's not necessarily a deal breaker here like it was with Munch. Stranger's Wrath has the advantage that it was already a highly polished game, so the HD remaster didn't really change the gameplay much, it just updated the graphics. but apparently the one thing they did want to one-up the Vita version on was the ugliness of its HUD, because Yeah, they outdid themselves here. Gameplay has stayed intact too, but unfortunately I feel that perhaps Stranger's Wrath is too much to translate comfortably onto a touchscreen, which especially doesn't help when the control layout hasn't been that well thought out in the first place. Every first-person shooter I've ever played on mobile has a button to fire your weapon on either side of the screen, so whether you need to move or fire, or aim and fire, you're always covered. This game doesn't have that, so unless you claw grip your device like you're playing Monster Hunter, you're constantly jumping your thumb back and forth between aiming and trying to shoot. It really isn't great. And it's even worse if you're playing on a tablet. Like, there's just so many buttons going on here that I found it really uncomfortable to reach my thumb over to press them. And some actions are bound to motion controls. To heal, you have to shake your device, to reload you need to tilt it, and let me tell you, there is a fine line between shaking and tilting, and I could not for the life of me find it. Maybe play this one on a phone, so you don't have to shake your massive tablet all over the place. But really, even if the controls of this game were fine, you probably still wouldn't want to play this version, because it's broken. The skunk is one of the most helpful ammo types in the game because it can incapacitate a large group of enemies, making them throw up everywhere and letting you bounty them real easy. Not in this version though, despite the tutorial still saying that they are used to make enemies throw up, they don't. Only damaging enemies when you fire it at them, completely negating the entire reason why you would use the ammo type in the first place. So, by playing the mobile version of Stranger's Wrath, you are not only handicapping yourself with awkward controls, but also you can't even use all the weapons at your disposal, and the game is hard enough, even with all of them to use. Again, just like Munch on the Vita and its audio issues, it sounds like a really small problem, but is still an absolute deal breaker for me. Especially when you can buy better versions of the game where everything actually works properly. Now I know when I was talking about the Vita version of Stranger's Wrath, I probably raised a few eyebrows when I said that it was my preferred choice because it's portable, when the Nintendo Switch version exists as well. Well, Oddworld Stranger's Wrath HD for the Switch, released in 2020, is probably the most deceptive port I've ever talked about on this channel. Again, developed by Square One. I really wish they'd stop hiring these guys to handle their ports, because despite being called Stranger's Wrath HD, it just isn't. It's the mobile game again, but with the HD graphics added in, the exact same thing that happened with Munch, but at least then they had the decency to not call it the HD version, and of course that means it's £27 again. The game runs at 60 FPS, the HUD has been slightly improved over the mobile version, though that isn't a massive achievement, and you can even still use the mobile version's HUD if you really hate yourself. Which you probably would, after paying £27 for a mobile game, to be fair. Which honestly is kinda disgusting. It literally isn't Stranger's Wrath HD, and the only reason I know it isn't is because the skunks are still broken, just like they are in the mobile game. Bearing in mind this port came out 6 years after it did on mobile, and they never bothered to fix it. It feels incredibly slimy that they would then go on to mark up the price that much. And again, I feel like I'm going insane, because despite being so blatantly broken within the first 5 minutes of booting up the game, I haven't read a single review that has ever brought it up. Does the game hate me? Is it me? Did no game reviewer notice this? So, Stranger's Wrath HD isn't Stranger's Wrath HD, but is actually Stranger's Wrath, the mobile game, which often goes on sale for 89p, but because it's now on the Switch, costs £27. I genuinely cannot believe they are selling this broken port for this much. Even if you are considering it for the convenience of playing it portably and on the big screen, if you buy it on the Vita, it comes with the PS3 version anyway. There is literally no reason whatsoever to buy the Switch version of Stranger's Wrath. Learn from my mistake of buying it when it first launched. Just stick with the PC or Vita versions. Finally, the last game we are talking about today is Oddworld New and Tasty. A remake of Oddworld Abe's Oddysee, New and Tasty takes the gameplay and levels we all know and love, and, well, it tried its best to modernise them, but kinda falls short in a lot of respects. Not that I'm saying the original game needed to be modernised, but it's what they tried to do, and it's these new modernised aspects which I think makes the game fall short of the original. Some of the added quality of life features are nice, namely the quick save and being able to talk to multiple Mudokons at once, but overall the gameplay is missing that same juicy weightiness that the original had, everything being sped up to almost comedic effect. But by far the biggest problem the game has is that it took the level design and gameplay of a screen-based game with a grid-based movement and made it freely scroll with no grid system, and the compromises and half measures they had to make in order to try and make that work really hurts it. In Oddysee, everything you had to pay attention to was right in front of you on screen. It was crystal clear. Now with the free scrolling, it means you have to take so many different things into consideration that you never had to before, like enemy sight and hearing ranges, where the nearest chance suppressor is so you don't get randomly zapped from off screen, what part of the puzzle is even important for you to focus on right now, and overall, while it doesn't break the puzzles, apart from in some areas where it literally does, because you can interact with enemies and Mudokons that would have regularly been off screen, it does make them feel messier, less precise, less polished, resulting in a lot of unfair and frustrating deaths, which is probably the only reason why they felt the need to add some of the changes that they did, like the quick save or giving Abe a health bar on normal difficulty. All that said though, while I know a lot of fans have their problems with the game, and I know I do too, because I literally just said them all, I do still enjoy New and Tasty for what it is, even if it isn't on the same level as Oddysee. I think it looks beautiful, lens flares and all. I love the new design twists on older areas, and even if not as solid, the gameplay is still classic Oddworld and still enjoyable. Annoying gameplay quirks, constantly repeating audio samples, and ugly black smoke plumes to make up for the fact they couldn't figure out how to make shadows work properly in Unity, notwithstanding. They don't even work as a substitute that well. Like, what kind of smoke is this that enemies can't see you when you're stood in it, but can see you if you're stood on the other side? Like, that's not how thick, opaque black smoke works, I think. I suppose most importantly though, it did what it had to do. It pushed Oddworld back into the public spotlight, selling well enough to fund its sequel, the first brand new original Oddworld game in over a decade. And I like playing it as an alternative way to enjoy a game I love, finally fulfilling a childhood dream of mine, which was to have an Oddworld game that looked just as good in-game as it did in the cutscenes. If you're a newcomer to Oddworld, it's probably as good a place as any to jump into the series because of how easily available the game is, and once you've played it, you then have the added fun of going back to the original and seeing what it was based on. The frustration of making it through Oddysee completely blind with faraway checkpoints is probably about equal to the frustrations this remake introduced, so pick your poison basically. You'll have a good time regardless. Anyway, you probably know the drill by now. New and Tasty received ports to the Vita, mobile, and Switch, so one last time, let's have a look at them. Instead of release order this time round, I'm gonna go in order of how interesting I think each port is. Its port patrol factor, if you will, which means starting with the Switch version, because honestly, I don't think I have anything interesting to say about it whatsoever. Released in 2020 and developed by Just Add Water, New and Tasty on Switch is a good port. So well done, Switch, you have one good Oddworld game on you. It looks beautiful in handheld mode, it controls well, the frame rate is a little shaky in places, but nothing unplayable. Really, there isn't a lot to say. There isn't really anything weird about the game, apart from one tiny detail I noticed, which is actually really weird. New and Tasty launched in 2014 with in-game advertisements for other indie games that would display on the in-game billboards. They were quickly removed after launch because everyone hated them, but for whatever reason, and I'm not sure if this was a glitch or what, because it only happened a few times while I played through it, but they're still present here. Again, don't really know if that's intentional or not, but, you know, it's a bit weird, right? I guess in the first level, there's a room or two where the barrels look a bit scummy, but I guess you could even go as far to say that I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel trying to find anything to talk about here. Haha, kill me. It's a good port, but again, because it's a Switch port, it's like £27, which admittedly doesn't hurt as much now that it's a more modern game, and a version you might actually want to play, but it's still like half as much on every other platform, so unless you really, really want to play it portably, it probably isn't worth it. Wow, that was well worth £27, wasn't it? To talk about the game for like less than 2 minutes. Patreon.com/Paw Patrol. Next up is the mobile version, released in 2017 and developed by our good old friends at Square One. And, for once, they can be happy that they actually managed to port an Oddworld game that isn't broken or bad in some way or another. Like, it's fine. It's what you would expect. It's new and tasty with worse graphics, scummy looking barrels everywhere now instead of just a few rooms, and finicky touchscreen controls. Again, I don't really have a lot to say. The controls are probably about as good as they could be. The only big problem I see is that you can't roll while running, which I'm pretty sure is required in later levels of the game, but not gonna lie, didn't get far enough to have that be a problem. Apart from that though, it certainly is new and tasty. I feel like the fact the game was made in a more modern engine like Unity has really limited the weird factor these ports can have. Though I will say, it definitely screams of a game that was not made with this platform in mind, and has been cut down, squeezed, and squished in every possible way to make it fit. A lot of the fancier effects, like the bloom and lens flares, are essentially all removed. Smokestacks have been reduced in density so much you can barely even tell if you're hidden in them half the time. The moon in this level is just literally our moon but blue. That's a weird one. And the distance fog has had to be pulled in so aggressively that some levels cease to have any background decoration at all, instead just existing in a bizarre green void. Like I said, it's not an ideal way to play the game, but, you know, I suppose you technically can, and there isn't anything technically wrong with it, which is more than I can say than the other Square One games, so we'll take these small victories where we can get them. Finally, I left the weirdest for last. The PlayStation Vita port, released in 2016 and developed by, you guessed it, Nephilim Game Studios. No idea where these guys came from. And I'm going to be upfront with you, the Vita version is by far the worst way to play the game. If the mobile version screamed a game that wasn't made for the system, then the Vita version is screeching it while holding a sign saying, "Oh god, oh no, help me, I'm going to burst into flames." It's bad in that classic Port Patrol way that I absolutely adore. Barely running the game at all, but still somehow being impressive that it even can in the first place. Even though the Switch version is better than it hands down, I like the Vita version more just because it's bad. It barely runs, and seemingly just gets worse and worse the further into the game you get. Quick saving and passing a checkpoint makes the game freeze for like an entire second. The graphics have had to be pared back even further than the mobile version, to the point that it can't even afford to colour the moon blue anymore. And also, slightly detrimental to the game is that the chant suppressors do not light up anymore. So the one indicator you had on if you would get zapped or not is completely missing here. All of the sligs in the game seem to be like the classic visor type as well, rather than a mix of classic and pilot goggle that the actual New and Tasty has. I know it's probably a byproduct of it just trying to reduce the amount of stuff it has to load, but that was actually something a lot of people didn't like about New and Tasty, so it kind of accidentally fixed that. The sound effects have all been compressed so much it feels like I'm listening to the game for a string with a bucket at the end of it. This version has an 84 on Metacritic, by the way. But in the exact same way I adore ports like Doom on the GBA, I find the exact same sort of enjoyment playing this game. Seeing the lengths they had to go to in order to condense the PS4 version down to work on the Vita is absolutely fascinating, and kept me playing for way longer than I thought I would, getting further into the game than I did with any of the other ports I talked about. I can't really recommend you buy this version, especially considering that you can literally just buy the actual Abe's Oddysee on the Vita. But that's exactly what I'm doing. Everyone should play this game. It's a masterpiece. If you're watching one of my videos, chances are it would be right up your alley anyway. You can't actually buy it on the Vita, you just can't buy it on its own. But by purchasing the PS4 version, it comes bundled with the Vita and PS3 versions, which probably also runs just as terribly. It's like the best deal ever. It's basically made for me. $11,385. That is how many words I've written for these two videos about the Oddworld series. Originally I just wanted to cover the Game Boy games, but my ambition quickly grew over time, and, well, you just sat through the result. A final script that was 3 times as long as the previous longest video I had ever produced. I love Oddworld. I really do, and I hope that came across in this video. Replaying the entire series for this has been a lovely way to re-experience the franchise. Though I will also admit, it has kind of also made me re-evaluate that relationship with Oddworld inhabitants as they exist today. Slight downer there. Abe's Oddysee and Exodus had such a tremendous impact on me as a kid. I feel like perhaps because of that, I was maybe giving Oddworld inhabitants a lot of goodwill that is maybe sort of starting to dry up. Like, I covered all but one of their recent releases in this video, and over half of them were broken in some way. And the only recent release I didn't cover here was the newest one, Oddworld Soulstorm, which is currently the 3rd worst reviewed game in the franchise, only being beaten by Munch's Oddysee on the Switch, and Munch's Oddysee on the GBA. It's hard not to feel then that maybe that loyalty isn't really paying off, when the reward for being so loyal will just be more terrible, broken ports of the exact same 3 games they've been porting to everything for the past decade or so. Or new releases that you have to wait 6 years for, so eager and ready to make a full video about, but ended up being so disinteresting that you can't even bring yourself to get the footage you need for it off your PlayStation. Were Abe's Oddysee, Exodus, and Stranger's Wrath just flukes? Well, if they were damn good ones, and the hope that we could one day have another Oddworld game that reaches those same heights means that Oddworld Inhabitants basically has me whipped, and I will likely continue to buy anything and everything they make, just like how I spent nearly £100 on these ports just for this video. For those of you still watching this, number one, you're lying, but number two, thank you. Oddworld means a lot to me, and although this was a weirdly personal video at times, I hope my passion for the series helped make it interesting to watch. I promise the next video won't be 40 minutes long.